Welcome to Camera Shake Podcast, episode 65. And before we get into today's episode, let me just remind you that if you are listening to the audio version of this podcast, make sure you head over to YouTube where you can see our beautiful faces in full Technicolor. And whilst you're there, why don't you hit the subscribe button, the bell, and do all that stuff that YouTubers always tell you to do. Leave us a nice comment. That'd be super nice as well. We love getting comments. But now, that being said, this is episode 65. And today's special guest is none other than Nina Welch-Kling, New York City-based street photographer, and the second time you're on the show. How are you, Nina?
I'm great. Good. Thank you so much for having me back.
It's great to see you again.
Yeah.
So how's the last few months been for you? Because you've been on the show, I'll say like 3 months ago, maybe?
I think April. It's New York has definitely opened up, so that's been nice. I think once most of New York City's people are vaccinated, so that has really changed how people are. Restaurants, everything is open, no more masks, only public transportation. So that's great. So yeah, and I've traveled. We just talked about this a little bit. I actually got to see my mom in Germany, so that was nice after a year and a half to see her in person and not on Skype.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's fantastic. So you managed to travel all the way from New York City back to Germany without any hiccups? Was it difficult to travel this time, or was it business as usual?
The hardest part was getting ready for the trip and figuring out and sorting out all the new restrictions and how and quarantine and what do you need. But the actual travel was relatively easy. So once you get past the initial figuring it out, it was great. And Germany had just reopened, so we were able to have dinners outside. The weather was actually beautiful, and so it was really nice just to be back home.
How was it in the airport and on the plane? I mean, the reason I'm asking is because I'm actually looking into traveling to Germany myself in the next month or so.
I don't think they'll let you in.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, your German is too bad. But how was it? Like, I mean, were there like any special measures at the airport? Was it any different?
Very little. I mean, they were very thorough in looking through your PCR tests, and that was all. That took longer than you would think because they do it all the time now. But once you're through, it was fine. The plane was full, so it was not. I mean, everybody had to keep their mask on during the flight, which it's a long flight to keep a mask on. But it was, you know what, it was fine. Not such a big issue.
Yeah.
So you'll be fine. It's a 45-minute flight.
It's to the south of Germany. It's probably about an hour and 10, hour and 15, something like that. So it's not that.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine. It's fine.
It's more like, traveling with children or with small children, that's the main thing for me. But I'm sure, right. It's, I mean, just like yourself, I haven't seen my family there for like a year and a half. And it's, it's time.
I felt the odd thing is that because I talk to my mom a lot via Skype or bunch like every other day, it didn't feel as removed. Because you kind of feel like you connect with them every day. You see their voice, you see their mood. Yes, it's still very different, and it was great seeing her in person. But I can't imagine how it would have been like without seeing her every day on video. That would have been such a different scenario.
Have you spoken to her more over the last 18 months than perhaps you would have done in normal circumstances?
I talk to my mom quite often. But definitely, I would talk more on the phone or kind of a quick phone call. But the video calls, and she was by herself, so I would stay on the phone probably longer. But it was very nice to connect in person. But it didn't feel, and she felt the same way. It didn't feel like you were all of a sudden you haven't seen each other in a year and a half, and it's odd. It was nothing like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I think we probably talk more regularly now. I think I make more of a point of actually calling her every weekend. It's like our sort of family weekend thing, But it's more, I think, my youngest daughter is 10 and she just turned 10. And like for her, that's difficult because she's not really a FaceTime talker. My youngest kid, she gets bored very quickly on FaceTime. And the thing I think for her,
I'm sick of seeing your face, Dad.
well, but I think for her, it's more about
that might be a
stuff.
different issue.
Exactly. But, for her, it's more like being able to do stuff with grandma that she's missing.
Yeah.
Going to places, just like things like, I don't know, eating grandma's cake, something like that. And I think that's difficult for her. And I can tell how that's had an impact on her. So I think for me, it's probably more important to try and make sure that my daughter can see,
100%.
my mom. And of course, I mean, I like a good old German barbecue. Nothing wrong with that. I'm definitely up for that.
It's all about the food.
Hey, it's all about the food.
Speaking of which, aren't you supposed to be barbecuing for us soon?
Am I? Oh, maybe I am.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I have. So I have official permission from my wife.
Sorry, really?
Yeah. So she actually said to me like, "Oh, yeah, if you want to hang out with the guys, no problem. I'll just make sure I'm somewhere else."
she knows the score.
And then what's the official German barbecue?
Oh, in the south of Germany, like where I'm from, in Swabia, it's red sausages.
Blood sausage.
No. It's like they call red sausage. They're like it's like bratwurst, but they call it's a special. They call them red sausages in Swabia. They look a little bit red. They have nothing to do with blood sausages or anything. There's no blood in it. Yeah, it's not my thing. What is it called? There's an equivalent in the UK.
Black pudding.
Black pudding. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, not my thing.
I used to hate that when I was growing up.
Oh.
But I've grown to quite like it.
Oh, man, the whole idea of it is just...
No, you have to forget about it. You have to forget about the idea of it and just taste it. And it's very good.
No, my mom's got this awesome smoker. And like, red like the traditional Swabian red sausage, like in a smoker. Yeah, it's good.
All right. Get some of those shipped, David. Oh, no, you can't.
No, I can't, no. Yeah, since we've left the EU, since Brexit, sending parcels from Germany to the UK is incredibly expensive. So,
actually, I had a book shipped. I wanted to have the Women Street Photographers book that I wanted to send a copy to my mom, and I found a place in I think in London, a bookshop that it was so complicated, and yes, I had to pay extra, and through the customs, I would never do it again. But I had no idea. So now that you say that, it makes sense.
Yeah, my mom actually sent a birthday parcel to my daughter, and she stupidly, you have to write like the value of the contents on the outside, and idiotically, in retrospect, she put the actual value on there, and then of course they hit her with import tax, and it was outrageous.
So we're not condoning that.
No. Yes, always, of course. But
this podcast has gone from blood sausage.
Yeah, we cut that bit out.
I don't know.
But it was just it was outrageous, absolutely outrageous. I mean, I think imagine like the total value was like I want to say like £160 or something, and then the import tax was like something like 80 pounds. So how is that?
And it sits in customs forever. And
the best thing was
it took.
And you have to pay a fee. Like there was an actual customs and then a customs release fee. So the fact that they keep your parcel there and open it up, you're paying for it. It's like
I was very surprised. I thought, within Europe, it's going to be so much easier than me shipping it from the US. It's cheaper, and not at all. Don't do it.
When you were in Germany, did you have a chance to do some street photography whilst you were there?
I actually did, and it's quite interesting. I'm so used to shooting in New York, where, one thing that has really changed is that because New York has been quiet and there have been very few tourists, shooting on the street, photographers are much more exposed. in a way that people see you more. There's no kind of tucking within people or moving with the flow of people. You really are visible, and it makes it you have to get used to it. It's a little adjustment to say, okay, it's fine. You can be out there. And so in Germany, it's a small town. There's not a lot of street photographers. I'm not sure if there are any. I'm sure there's people photographing the city hall. I mean, that's about the only thing they would photograph. But I did go around and I started talking to people, and people were more interested than negative, I would say, which was quite nice. Mm. Also, I was photographed around the farmers market. Some of the women that worked the stands were actually people that have always been there. So I've grown up with them.
Oh, okay.
So
cool.
I've known them. I looked at them. I'm like, wow, this is the same person selling the farm goods as they did 20 years ago. So it was actually very nice.
Yeah.
And I've been shooting a new series. So it was really fun to go out and shoot.
I was going to ask you how, like, you know, what you thought about sort of the differences just generally in like mentality when it comes to you shooting people in the street. Like, I know Germans are very hot on privacy, just generally.
Right, and legally, you are in Germany. I believe you have to ask before photographing a private person or get a release. Right. Now, I don't do that ever, so I kind of take my chances. If somebody would have been upset or would have said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I felt people were more like, "Oh, I don't want to be in your photo." I said, "No, it's fine. You know, please walk through it, please." And then I explained to them, "Oh, I do street photography, and I usually pull out my Instagram." The people I interacted with seemed very interested and quite open, which was very nice. Sometimes I think it's more when I photograph children, people get very protective of their children. Yeah. Adults usually have no issues, or, I mean, I smile at them. It's usually not. It was fine, surprisingly.
So technically then, if we were to go out into Germany and photograph, if I was taking a photo of you, for example, and a whole host of other people in the background, technically I should go and ask their permission before taking that photo. Is that accurate? Am I understanding that right?
I'm not 100% sure. I really would have to read up, but I know the privacy laws in Germany are much, much tighter than they are in the US. I know in New York, not that gives you permission to shoot anything you see. I mean, it's more, but then it becomes more of an ethical or moral question of what you want to shoot. But anything in a public space, I think we talked about this a little bit the last time, you can shoot. So if there is a person in a window undressing, you're okay to photograph them because they know that you're in a public place and they can see you. So you could step away and it's your choice whether you want to be seen or not. Now it's up to the photographer to choose what they want to show. In Germany, I never really looked into it because I haven't been shooting that much. But it kind of defeats the purpose of street photography. So I would always take my chances.
We shot an event, like the first live event that we've shot in like 18 months or something. And we shot this live event as an outside open air festival, basically, a couple of weeks ago. And I did all the photography. And so, of course, on one hand, you know, you shoot the stuff that goes on stage. But on the other hand, you also want to shoot the audience because you want to kind of create sort of, you want to document the day and, you know, portray the atmosphere and everything. And what was really interesting was that adults didn't really care that much. But kids, immediately, as soon as they see you point a camera at them, they immediately start pointing. Like little kids go.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've got a whole bunch of photos, like really cool photos of kids just pointing at me. And I know exactly what was going on at the time. They just figured, you know, I was taking a photo.
See, I always had the opposite reaction because I was filming the event and I had a shoulder rig on, so it's quite big, not necessarily too big, but slightly more, more cumbersome than just a stills camera. And I was finding the opposite. You go down and you feel some of the children playing or doing whatever they're doing with their parents, and they just freeze completely because it looks alien to them. It's completely different. No, carry on. And then that's it. The moment's gone. Yeah. So I had to try and be stealthy with it without, it looking a little odd. But I think the other benefit we had there is that, we were there in an official capacity.
Yeah.
And kind of identified as so as well. So people kind of expect that kind of thing's going to be going on.
It was, there weren't many punters running around with 70-200 lenses either. I mean, you immediately could figure that it was like an official thing that was happening.
True.
But I think also if you, as an event photographer, you also feel that I belong here. So you have a sense of self-confidence about, this is my job. So I should be here, and it's okay for me to photograph everybody and whatever I see, which is the same kind of feeling you need to take to the street.
Yeah.
Mm.
So this, I think, is always where people get very insecure in approaching people or shooting on the street. If you feel the same sense of almost belonging, and it's like you own the street, you portray to people that it's okay.
I think you're absolutely right. We kind of, I think we mentioned that last time you were on the show. It's just, getting that confidence in like being out there and taking pictures in the street, because certainly from our experience, our little sort of, what's the word?
Excursion
into street photography. I really felt that. I really felt like, awkward at first. I think as the day progressed, and specifically, I think the second time we went out, I felt a little bit more confident. And so I could really see that the more often you do this, the more you'll be able to build up your own confidence, and that's really key.
Yeah. And I think people sense that if you feel like, I'm fine here, and you smile at people and you're very open and you kind of really have eye contact with most people and kind of survey the scene, people's like, oh, okay, you know what? Oh, I don't know what they're doing, but it's okay. And I think you really have to portray this.
And
you have to kind of get to this point, because then you feel comfortable and close to, stepping away, walking around people, and you have a much better chance of photographing something that's, okay.
What I found funny, especially when we were in London, was that, sometimes there'd be like a situation where I could see some light, some shadow and some light, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a cool place. If I just wait here and wait for somebody to walk through, this could look really cool. And of course, you stand there with your camera at the ready. And what happens very often is that people clock you, and then they think, oh, I better stop because I don't want to walk through the shot. And you go, no, keep going.
No, go, please. Right. All the time.
Yeah, all the time.
Happens
exactly.
All the time. No, that is very much, and I think that is more of a problem. And, listening to your podcast, when there's not a lot of people out, that you have to wait too long, and then it's like, you kind of lose interest, and you move on, and hopefully you find a place where there's more people walking through your scene, and because that's, it's like once you have a place and once you have a light, like what is going to fill that space? You need something extraordinary, to come along, and most of the time that doesn't happen.
It felt like that when we were in London, and you know what? I was thinking about this as obviously we're doing today. That I feel like we almost we overstretched ourselves on that day. One, trying to film it. If you put that aside for a minute, that was a nightmare. But two, perhaps almost going to too many places, and that perhaps we weren't in one location for long enough to enable, like you say, something extraordinary to happen in a specific area. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think with London, what did happen was that, I think, when we had the best of intentions, because our intention was to create a whole episode around this little trip. And so the idea was, we would go and we would photograph, make some street photography and then film the whole process and turn that whole thing into an episode. But of course, when we got back, we realized we'd only filmed about 3 minutes worth of footage. And what actually happened was, we got into town, and it was the first time in a year that we'd been in town. And on one hand, it was such an overwhelming experience that it took us literally most of the day just to soak in the atmosphere, and we were like, I mean, it was fun really going from one place to the other because we hadn't been there
exactly.
over a year, and all of a sudden you're there and you're back in the center of London and you see Big Ben and St. Paul's and like the Strand and everything else. And it's just such a cool experience. And of course, at that time, it was still pretty empty as well. So although, we could travel at that point, not many people did. And so actually just going to central London and seeing and, taking in the atmosphere, like we were on the Strand, which is one of the busiest, roads in London, and there was hardly anybody there. And it's just, you stand there and you just can't take it all in because we're never probably going to see that ever in our lifetimes ever again, unless there's another pandemic, of course, in which case I'm moving out.
Let's not hope so. No, but I can absolutely see that if you're trying to film and photograph and walking around, it's too many things that you're trying to do.
Yep.
Because with street photography, and I that question comes up often, whether I go back to the same place or if I prefer going somewhere new. And it's a combination. There's certain places where I've been many times. You kind of find your place and your concentration, and you really start to kind of scan what's there. And it takes a certain mindset, and I'm not always in that mindset. So if I'm not in that mindset, I will not come home with any even decent photography, because there is this place you need to be in your head to really zoom in and see and respond and react to the world. My cell phone is usually off, because even a cell phone, because then it's all of a sudden you have a phone call and you're zoning, or you're really focusing on something, you lose that place. So I think when you film and if you photograph, and even going between two cameras, it's too much. Like I know you went with two cameras, too much. Like one camera, really spend the day and just find a place and walk around and just focus on what you're seeing. I think it's impossible to do all of that.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely...
No, that's for me.
No, and absolutely. We had exactly the same experience. I think we just realized that we totally, we thought like, okay, so, well, first of all, the next time we plan on making an episode where we are in it, but at the same time, we're doing something, we need to have somebody else film us. So that was the first realization. It's like, we just can't be in the episode and film it at the same time. So that's, that was one lesson. And the other lesson was like, okay, we need to really just have more time and just focus on one thing rather than trying to achieve all these different things. Yeah. All that. So in that respect, it was good. On the other hand, it was just a really nice trip into town.
It fun.
Was.
So yeah, it was a fun trip. So our original intention was to go out and to shoot silhouettes. That didn't go exactly as planned.
Nope. Not even close.
Not even close, no. Because, of course, we realized that actually, you need to have a certain type of light, and it's really not something you can very much plan for that much, I think was sort of the outcome. So, at some point when we realized that the light wasn't going to be doing what we needed to do, we just had some fun just photographing some things, so.
Yeah. I think doing the filming, photographing, then going around different locations and whatnot, I actually think that affected our photography on the day as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I don't think we came away with nearly as much as usable shots as we'd have wanted.
Absolutely.
I we came up with 3 photos each in the end, right? And
usable photos.
Yeah, and for me that was a stretch.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, it was a total stretch to find those. I thought, oh, no, they're cool.
Yeah.
I like those. Yeah, so I'd like to go back.
See, the thing is, like, so here's one question. My natural instinct is, and this is just because I do a lot of composites and that kind of stuff, you know, I would look at an image, and if one of the images we just sent over to you is actually a shot from Brighton, which we'll talk about in a minute. But my natural instinct is to look at a shot and I go like, oh, I think that would look cool with some birds in the sky. And I'd be like, I'm just going to put some birds in the sky.
Kersten cheats.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, it's just because, you know, I like making composites. That's the thing. So, you know, to me, it's like, you know, I'm looking at the image and I'm making the image in my opinion, you know, I'm making it better for what I think. But of course, then there's an argument to say like, well, you know, can you still define that as street photography, or is that now something else, is like visual art or something, or whatever? You know, that's the thing.
So I recently was on another podcast with Clarissa Bonet, and I don't know if you know her work, but she sets up the street scenes. And this is this whole discussion about, is that street photography? And she's like, you know, I don't claim to be a street photographer, and I don't want to misspeak for her, but I think the idea is that don't put yourself in a box.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a photographer that likes to shoot on the street. I'm not a photographer that likes to shoot in a studio. And the rest doesn't almost matter unless you really feel like you want to be in the street photography. And who defines street photography anyway? Like, whose definition is that? You know, you can say, fine, you know what, I like to do composites, but it's partly street scenes, and it becomes street photography, composite artwork, or the photographic art. I mean, I think I almost want to take out the name, or the box of street photography has become tight and wide in a weird way, because there's like this very group, like, what is street photography? It has to be candid. It has to be, but then there are all these other people who are shooting on the street. So, you know, I think it's up to you how you want to define yourself.
Yeah.
I like to think of myself, I'm a photographer that likes to shoot on the street, because I often don't fit into the street photography box. That kind of is tightly or neatly defined, and by many different people differently.
Well, that's what I always find difficult, is because it seems like everybody seems to have a different box. You know, like for some people, it's not real photography unless it's shot on film. You know,
right?
And then other people are like, well, as soon as you do any post-production on it, it's not photography anymore. Now it becomes a visual art, and you're gonna go, I just want to make a cool photo. You know,
like, who cares?
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I feel like, who cares?
Yeah.
But I think often these photography competitions, these awards, you have to put yourself in a box. And many times I've decided I'm not going to submit, because I really don't want to spend the next 3 days thinking about what box am I in, or where's this photograph going? And it really bothers me a lot. But I don't know how this will ever change, because it's and maybe it shouldn't change. But for me personally, I really don't like it, because I feel like I don't know where I belong, and I'm okay with that.
The goal is to create something interesting to look at, right? Something that evokes an emotion, something that makes you think about something in a certain way. You know, all right, maybe if you're doing pure documentary photography, that's one thing. But that's really the goal, no? You know, who cares how you came up with it? And you take the birds, adding some birds in, right? The point is, it's not like they didn't belong there. They just hadn't happened to have flown across at that moment.
So it's also not that in this particular case, this is really just an amalgamation of 2 shots. So I had actually shot the birds about half an hour earlier at a slightly different spot on the beach. And then the street scene I shot a little bit later. So the birds are not just random birds. They were actually there. They were just not in that place at that time, sort of thing. So it wasn't like, but I feel like the thing is, you're quite right, when you mentioned photographic competitions, because I had an experience like that only very recently. I don't typically enter things into competitions. In this particular case, there was a shortage of images for this particular competition. I was asked to enter something, so I said, yeah, why not? And the judge actually looked at this. Yeah, and so, I'm game for that. It's fine. But the judge looked at the image, and it's basically so for building, you can see some sky. I may have actually sent this over to you as well. But and then you see a plane in the center of the image, sort of behind some clouds. And then there was this whole discussion. When the judge was judging this, there was a whole discussion as to whether a plane was really there or not. It wasn't. It was photoshopped in because I just thought it looked cool, But he couldn't really quite make out whether it was actually there or not. And I kept, whilst I was listening to the whole deliberation, I kept thinking, like, what does it actually matter? Like,
I think that was actually a Sony World Photo Award photo.
There was,
and it was a plane. A photo. It was a very similar composition, and it was the building with I think the plane was photoshopped or it wasn't, and it became this very big discussion. I mean, I think if you could say you are in the category of fine art, you're free to do whatever you want.
Exactly.
Which is, I think you've had a whole podcast, or I think you had an episode on that, and I think you brought this up, like in my fine art, but it kind of gives you the freedom, and it doesn't categorize you. I mean, it categorizes you, but the minute if you say, I'm not a documentary photographer, you're free to do whatever you want.
I mean, I think there's an argument to say, like,
tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument to say, like, when you're talking about something like photojournalism, for example, there's an argument to say that you wouldn't want to portray the world the way it is because you're trying to convey a particular issue or story, and therefore altering the imagery may not necessarily serve your purpose. And I can see how in those categories you can draw a straight line and basically say, like, well, okay, you can't alter anything because then you're not depicting the real world, and then your whole your whole purpose, the thing you're trying to bring across, is loses value, so to say. But of course, the minute you cross over into an artistic category, then of course, I've always thought that it's those, artistically, it's those that break out of the box that push art further, because otherwise we'll still be painting with watercolors or with oil. If nobody said, like, I'm going to build this machine and it's got a wet plate in the back, and then I'm going to, let some light in there through a lens, and then we wait a little bit and there's a chemical reaction, and then you see something on there. If, people, I'm pretty sure back then people turned around and said, that's not art. That's not, how is that art? That's not painted with a brush. You can't categorize that as art, So, and then of course the same discussion happened when we moved from film to digital, and probably, I mean, you can go back, like, every time something changes in photography, in the techniques or whatever, there's this big argument about.
Yeah, every time something new comes in, doesn't matter what it is, what world it's in, people won't like it. That means you're on the right track.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was.
Or if people questions arise, or they can't figure it out, or they haven't seen anything like it, or there's some kind of criticism. Yes, I feel that's when, and I think that's for new work, that's what people really look for.
Yeah.
You want to see something else. And it's hard.
See, I had an interesting discussion with my daughter about this, because my older stepdaughter, she's doing photography A-levels, which is basically the equivalent of, what would be the equivalent?
I think like an advanced,
Yeah, so it'd be, the German equivalent would be the Abitur. So she's doing photography Abitur, if you want, A-levels. And so she just got some marks back on some of the stuff that she'd done, which was basically sort of UV light photography. That's the kind of thing that she's into. And I have to say, she has created some really interesting images. They're really interesting. They're very creative. She's like painted some flowers with UV paint, and then photographed them and stuff like that. And so there's some interesting stuff in there. But she got her marks weren't exactly amazing, and she was quite upset about that. And she was like, how can you mark art anyway, and yada yada, And we had this discussion. I said, like, look, you sent some files over to me because you wanted me to print some stuff. And I remember when I was like looking at the files, I'm like, okay, that's not sharp. There's some technical issues with this, And so we had this discussion about, the technical and the creative part of it. And yes, it's difficult sometimes maybe to judge the creative element, but you can judge the technical, because if it's not sharp, it's not sharp.
Unless you don't want it to be sharp, unless it's
you don't want it to be
emotion.
sharp.
But it has to be, I feel it has to be done with intention.
Exactly.
And it kind of, I think the technical has to match also the conceptual. So
absolutely.
a really good work of art, I think both of these parts come together, as the conceptual part and the technical part and the execution, and how it's how in Photoshop or in post-production, how did you refine it? It really has to be a finished piece of art, unless it's about progress or process or but then again, you need to know the photo has to speak for itself and say, this is about the process of development or the UV light, and it still has to be visible as that. I mean, it's hard. I think it's hard to grade, because if there's 5 teachers will have different opinions. That's something that becomes harder, because she would have had different marks from 5 different teachers, or maybe not. Maybe there really was one part that was just not as developed as the conceptual idea. I always was a better conceptual artist than I was in the execution. And I struggled with this all my life.
Yeah. And for her, it's that the conceptual part, I think that's hard for her to grasp just yet, because she's, relatively new to the whole thing. And I think, the conceptual part, for instance, she had to print a zine, like a little photo book. And when you, on the surface, when you look at it, it actually looks great. I mean, the colors are really cool. They're really vibrant. She's used the UV paints really well. But when you look through the whole thing, you're struggling. I was struggling to see the conceptual part. There's some faces with UV paint. There's some flowers painted with UV paint. I think there was a photo of the dog painted with UV. I don't know. But it's like you look through and each image on its own, you can kind of go, oh, that looks cool. But when you see it in context, when you look at the whole thing, I was like, and again, we had this discussion. It's like, it's difficult. I mean, all the images are cool. I wouldn't mind putting any of these on my wall, but in context, I don't really see what the connection is, other than the fact that they're all very blue. I don't really see what the connection is throughout this whole thing. And that's where the kind of the sort of wider view comes in. I think that's difficult maybe sometimes for somebody who's new to photography to grasp.
I think for anybody.
Yeah.
Don't you struggle with that? I mean, I struggle with that. I mean, any new project, like, how do you have a consistent body of work that says something, and how is there a red line that follows through in all of them? How is your sequencing done so that the story doesn't become boring? How do you edit your photo work? I mean, it's hard. And she's young and she has so many years to learn this. And luckily she'll have teachers who will have to tell her this. Hopefully she's not watching this podcast, because nobody wants to hear this from their parent.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to hear this from their parent.
Yeah.
No judge.
And the thing, that's it, and the thing is, like, if I think about the kind of photos that I used to make when I was her age, her photos are a million times better than what I used to make back then, so it's,
Have you told her that?
No. Why would I do that? That'd be crazy. Don't be crazy. Never admit weakness as a parent.
But so the learning and, and I think the listening to people. So yes, you're really annoyed that your teacher gave you not great marks because, she probably views it was a cool project and the idea, and she was very excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Once you step back from that and then somebody says that, it's really hard.
Yeah.
But you learn to take criticism and kind of learn from it. You said to me, I can't be critical about your work, so no. Nice. Speaking of.
But sometimes it needs you need to be able to step back from something and just let time pass. And as you develop, you sometimes you can look at something in retrospect, and you get more of a wider perspective, and you kind of go, oh, actually, yeah, that really wasn't that great.
And
I mean, do you do that? People always say you should download your photos and let it sit for a couple months. Yeah. Now, I don't do that often, but I do know when you go back, like I think during the pandemic, a lot of us went back to their archives. And then things that you might have thought was really good shot, you're like, you know what? The one next to it is actually so much more interesting, which at that time, I totally dismissed. But who has the time to go back? But truly, I know people say that you should be letting it sit and then look back and have distance.
I used to do that when I was a kid, when I used to practice the guitar. And I used to, record myself on a little voice recorder, like with the, the micro tapes. And so what I would do would be, I'd play something, I'd come up with something, because I always used to like to write stuff. So I'd come up with like guitar riff or something, or a bit of a guitar solo or something. And I would that'd be like the best thing since sliced bread in my mind. And I would record it, but then I would take the tape and I would put it in a shoebox and I would leave it for 6 months. And then, and in the meantime, I would come up with lots of other stuff. But every 6 months I would go back and I would listen back to a tape from 6 months ago. And the funny thing was, of course you remember when you recorded that at a time, you thought this was hot, this was awesome. And then you listen back to it 6 months later and you go, that's crap. My notes are bent out of tune. The timing's off. The sound is terrible. Yeah. The idea isn't actually that great. And it's just funny how, how perspective actually allows you to.
I think it's really important.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to then look back. But it's also, I don't know if when you were out shooting on the street, there's usually 1 or 2 times where you get this kind of flood of feels, you get so excited about a shot.
Yeah.
And at that, it's like that feeling of, this is why you're doing photography, because I can't even describe it. It's this wonderful feeling when you think you have a shot. But then when you come home, those are never the shots that I actually like.
No.
I don't know. It's because of the small screen. I don't know if it's maybe too contrasty, then something will be out of focus. But it's 99% of the time, it's not the shot where my heart started to flutter on the street.
Yeah. I do that every time.
That does happen.
Without fail.
And it's mainly because I actually, I really like the screen on the back of my little Fuji. It looks really great on the screen, but then when you put it up on a 5K screen at home, you go, nah, it's not in focus.
It's not,
it's not as good as it would have. So that does definitely happen.
Yeah.
So for those of you who saw episode 52, you may remember that we did, in actual fact, threaten Nina with some street photos. And she's kindly agreed to review some of the photos that we shot back on our little London trip. So Nina, we sent you some photos. And it'd be super awesome if we could get your opinion on those. So this was our first and our second street photography trip.
Yeah,
I would say. So
we're actually starting with a photo from Brighton now.
So the first photo is actually pretty much the last photo from our very first trip to Brighton. And
there's a little bonus.
That's a little bonus photo, that's right.
My first impression, I love the dark atmosphere of the photo.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a great book cover, the between the birds and the shadow and it must have been a wet day maybe.
Yeah, it was.
The highlights on the street, the leading line. I think in order to because there's a car with the lights at the end. The one thing, if you have a strong leading line, you want something strong where your eye goes to.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a viewer, like you go there, so you have the car and you have people off to the right. Now, ideally, if you would go back and reshoot it, if there's no car and there's somebody walking by with an umbrella, with balloons, something, a kid playing, something where it keeps your eye in the back, because you are forcing, and plus your eye usually goes to the lightest part of the photograph.
Mhm.
So my eye goes up to the birds. And then the birds, I think the birds are great. I actually like the birds added in. I love that those birds appeared in this photograph. It would have been, now bird photography is interesting in street photography because even the birds need to be placed perfectly. So you could have, or I probably would not have that cluster where they're kind of overlapping the wings. So if the wings, or move it over a little bit, or remove some of the wings so you have a clear silhouette, which I sometimes actually do in my photographs. If there is some kind of overlap for a silhouette, I will either go in and highlight it a little more so it pops more. I do like the sense of scale of the people at the end. I think that's awesome. Because if you have this kind of shot where you have the building in the foreground, I think the sense of scale is fabulous. Because you really feel that these buildings are towering and leaning in from right and left side. And I think it's a great photo in terms of the atmosphere and the sky and the birds and the people. It's very daunting.
I think that was sort of the thing. I think the idea was really Hitchcock's The Birds.
Right. Yeah.
And it's absolutely right what you said about having something being the focal point, when your eyes are being let down these leading lines. And I think the thing there was originally was that it was a pretty clear sky. I mean, it was, you can see the clouds and whatever, but I just felt it needed something else in there, which is why I took the birds that I'd shot about half an hour earlier and composited them in to give it something of interest in that big space that would have otherwise just been.
What I really like
clouds.
Is that you can't actually be sure whether this is shot during the day or at night. Do you know what I mean? It's got a bit of all of it about it. I'm trying to remember when it actually was now. I think it was late afternoon, memory serves.
Yeah,
you could actually even pull, right, if you even pull the highlights down in the sky more, it could be almost a night shot. And then actually those lights on the left, which kind of get lost of the buildings, or even those two little, those can become like, oh, something's happening, like this mystery story that behind those windows, ideally would have been one a little bit maybe further down the road.
Yeah.
But your story will shift if this becomes a nighttime story. And many times, I mean, I actually took a class with this wonderful teacher, Jason Langer, and he teaches this class about night photography, but he also teaches you how to take daylight photos and create and move them into the nighttime, or make them appear to be nighttime photos, which very much changes the atmosphere. So I actually love the idea that it's almost like a nighttime photo.
Very often when you see that in film, it doesn't really work out very well.
Often it doesn't. Yeah,
it happens
all the time.
Yeah, I know.
It's all the time, particularly just to get so you can keep your eyesight down. It's that kind of reason that they often do it. Technical reasons more than anything else. It's easier to focus. It's easier to do all sorts of things during the day.
More often than not, you totally realize what's happening. Just go, I'm not buying that.
Yeah,
that was like shot at 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah, and it's just been turned blue.
Especially when you see like big shadows. Like it's a nighttime scene.
That's a problem.
Yeah, it's kind of a giveaway.
So, if you don't have a lot of shadow, but I do love. Yeah, I agree. I love that it's kind of this nighttime, daytime haunting atmosphere.
Yeah, it had that kind of Hitchcock kind of vibe to it. I think that was sort of the idea. And which is it was a fun little. I love a good composite.
You do,
I do too.
So the first photo for me. So this is now we're into our London photos. So this was. Do you know what? I don't remember exactly where this was now. Was it down by? Oh God, it's near the river though, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Near the river. So it's an office building type area, but it's got a walk through all around it. You find a lot of tourists down there, mostly because of the flooring that's along there, and it's got some sort of water chutes or fountain style things at the end as well. So you find a lot of tourists down there, and we were just walking through here, and Kay happened to be walking along that stretch in the middle, and thought, and this was right, let's just take a snap now, let's get it done quickly. While he was there, I said, Kay, turn around, look at me, put your camera down, and just took it. In hindsight, I'd like to have been slightly more on center with that, but never mind. Never mind. I still quite like the photo though. Anyway, do your worst.
Yeah, interesting. I think it is centered when you say you would like it more centered.
Kirsten is, but the difference in the flooring in the middle would have been nice if that was further off.
I read it as very much centered because, again, my eye, the part that I'm most interested in is the very nice negative space around the head.
Yeah.
That kind of cutout that it creates. I think if you actually lighten the side of the building a little more, then the whole figure becomes more of the space around it. Because on the right side where it kind of gets blended in a little more. So in order for that, because it's all about the figure. I mean, this is less of a candid street shot. I think it's more of to me, it reads more like a portrait in an environmental portrait.
Yeah.
So I think I think it reads really well as that. And I really do like how you place the face and how you immediately go to the figure. And it really is about the figure. I think if you would have wanted to make it more into a street scene, I would have moved him way back.
Further back,
in space.
Yeah.
Because then he kind of becomes part of the scene, and you would have had the white space create a frame around him and would have set him apart from the environment around him.
Absolutely.
Because that white space to me is with the sky, and there's enough tone in the sky, and the sky is really beautiful and has a lot of detail, because often they get blown out on a sunny day. So your advantage doing street photography on a cloudy day is that you actually have a sky, and then you can take advantage of it, which is when it's a beautiful blue day, where for silhouette it's a better light when it's very sunny. But I think in this case, if you wanted it to be more of a street shot and be more about scale, which is what I often do. I mean, you do get a sense of scale because the people on the right and left are very small, and I actually really like that. So you move in and out of the space by their scale. But in the end, it's still, to me, more of an environmental portrait. And not environmental, but it's more of a portrait in this architectural space.
Yeah.
But I think it looks great as that.
Just remembered that there is a little bird on the floor on the left-hand side. I'd forgotten about that.
Oh yeah.
It's been a long time since I've looked at this photo.
There's a pigeon there.
Yeah.
But also, I love all the textures of the windows and the floor, and the change from the brick to the other one. I think it's a great place to shoot street shots, and I think you should definitely go back and kind of see what happens if people walk across it.
Yeah.
And much further back.
Wasn't that the same location where we shot the super tame squirrel?
Yes, it was. That was just behind there.
That was the tamest squirrel I've ever met. We saw this little squirrel hopping around there.
Yeah.
And that dude wasn't shy at all. He was just like hanging out. It's a big city squirrel.
Yeah, he really was.
The poor pigeon gets lost. I mean, if you could have taken your camera close to it. Now, I'm not sure what you're shooting with. Probably
this was
longer.
on a 35.
So you could have gone close to the pigeon and kind of made the pigeon your big foreground.
Mm-hmm.
And then have the rest of the people kind of disappear in the background.
Yeah.
But the distortion of the beauty of the 35 millimeter is, for street photography, is that the things in your foreground become big.
Yeah.
So because you're close to Kate, he's big. He becomes the center of the photograph. But you could have done the same thing with the pigeon.
Yeah.
And then your photograph would have been a very different feeling with all the people around and the feet, and your perspective would have changed.
Yeah, completely.
But it's a different kind, right? Or kind of let people cross in the space.
Yeah.
I think we've definitely got to go back there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I loved walking around there.
I mean, the lighting is beautiful, and the reflection is beautiful, and the tones are great. So it's definitely a great space. And I'm sure, depending on how the sun comes in, you probably get some very strange lighting situations that bounce off, which would make it super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we weren't there for very long, were we? This was like, again, sort of mid-afternoon sort of time. I think we were around this area. Yeah, we weren't there long, but there's loads of little great little places, and the light you can see where the light would fall.
So for the next shot, this is a shot that I took in one of the side streets, and as always, I think when you are in a city, you're very often preoccupied with the things that are happening in front of you, but especially in big cities, it pays to look up sometimes. And so in this particular area of London, in this particular street, I think the thing that was striking was just this geometry of the the balconies and the lines and those buildings, and with the sky being what it was, it just it seemed like it would make a good shot. So that's how that came together. The plane in the middle is, well, it wasn't really there, but it just seemed like it should be there. So yet again, it's obviously composite in, but I don't know. To my sensibilities, it just felt like it needed something in the center there, like some kind of center focal point type of a thing. But I didn't feel like it had to be necessarily too obvious. That's why I kind of, I made it look like it was sort of hiding in the clouds almost a little bit. I did enter this, like I mentioned earlier, into a competition, and that was one of the main talking points, was whether that plane was real or not. So yeah, it worked for me at a time. is what I would say.
So I think, again, in terms of composition and tonality, even if that's even a word, I love I love those lines on this. I guess they're balcony lines, or the railings going up. Now, you're absolutely right that your focal point again goes to the lightest part of the photograph. So then you decided to put the airplane there, but now I'm thinking, what could there be where you wouldn't Photoshop and that would make this photograph of interest in that space? Would it have to be crazy clouds, or would it be more about the clouds? What if the clouds become more of the focal point and you actually have just less on the sides and just have fragments of the building? Because right now you have your focal points is the geometry of the building. And I like that the right side and the left side is actually not symmetrical. So you have this kind of zigzagging in and out on the right side, and you have just this one line on the left side. What would happen if you kind of go further to the right and it becomes a kind of a slimmer space in the middle, or you make it about the sky with the fragments on the side.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that works or not, but somehow your intuition of something needs to be there is because it does make it a better photo if there is a point of interest in the lightest part. But what happens if you put it on a diagonal? Because then it becomes more dynamic. Do you still need the plane in the middle? Yeah. But again, I mean, you clearly are very successful in finding the geometry and a very pleasing layout of a photo. But it's more about the architecture than it is about street photography.
Yeah, so this is, you're absolutely right there. Again, I think it's very difficult sometimes to draw, for me it is anyway, is to draw that line, between, street photography and architectural photography, because, when I think it's probably the same for most people, is when you see a really good composition or when you see something of interest that you think would make a good photo, then I usually take the shot. So
to me, the difference is, that's personal. I like to show the impact of a human being.
Yes.
So let's say one of the balcony would have had a piece of laundry blowing.
Yeah.
I don't think you needed anything else, because I think the story is that there are people living. So one little, or a handprint, or maybe some graffiti on the side on one side. So my distinction of street photography, it does not have to have people. It can be architectural. But in my mind, it needs to have a human impact.
Yeah, some kind of human element.
Of trace, like a trace of a human element. And it doesn't matter. It could be a car that has left an oil stain. So it doesn't even have to be people. It could be anything that has to do with something inhabiting it. It could be bird poop for all I care. But something that was left behind.
Yeah.
To and that is kind of where my street photography tends to go towards, even though I have mostly a lot of people. But the photos where there are no people in it, I think it's important to have a trace of something living.
Yeah, some kind of human impact.
Some kind of human impact. So, for example, if one of the railings would have been bent.
Yeah.
Because the symmetry is set up, and you set it up beautiful, and I think you set up the black and white is beautiful, and the tones are beautiful. But imagine one of those railings that would have been missing or broken.
Yeah. So
all of a sudden, your story changes in that photograph. And that's when I go out, I look for these inconsistencies. Like the outlier. I like to call it the outlier. Like the one thing that's higher, or the one thing that's lower, the one thing that's missing.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but you train your eye to look for these things.
It's an interesting experience, really, as you get into it. And this is like we very often, but every time we go on a little trip like that, we have sort of almost like a debrief where we talk about the sort of takeaways from that particular trip and what we've learned, and what the outcome of those experiences is. And I think the one thing for me was really that I realized that actually for me, like in street photography, the human element is really important. And what happens is you start focusing on the human being in the shot, rather than taking it in as a complete scene. And I find it very easy to get sidetracked by a cool looking building, or
Same.
like, and it's, and I think that's one of the takeaways for me has been is as you said, is actually to look out for that human impact of the human element in it. So that's definitely a thing to focus on next time.
Yeah.
Or the out of the ordinary in that building.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if you would have stepped back, maybe one of those balconies had something a little different. Because then that's where your eye goes, and you don't need to add the plane.
Yeah, true.
Because your eyes will automatically kind of look, if there would have been some weird graffiti on the bottom of one of the balconies, or if there would have been something hanging off the balcony, or maybe one of the windows could have been open. So once you add another element that's out of the ordinary, I think it's enough in an architectural building to keep the viewer's interest. Instead of saying, oh, wow, this is very cool. This is a wonderful graphic. Or now you could go the total opposite way while I'm looking at this. You can so blow it out, like so push the contrast in this photo that all you would see is black squares and a white sky in the middle and or kind of dots.
And that's actually, incidentally, that's exactly what I did on the first edit that I did on this. I completely blew out the sky. And when I was looking at that at the time, and then I compared it to bringing out the contrast in the clouds a little bit, for some reason, I just preferred to look at the clouds. And then I just went, oh, and now I need a plane.
But then it comes to kind of how does it sit with the rest of your work? Are you interested in conceptual work where it's more about the geometry floating in the sky, or just like a field of pieces, or is it more about the geometry of buildings within the real world?
You're absolutely right. You mentioned it earlier when you spoke about body of work, which is really something. It's a really interesting kind of red thread that goes through a lot of the conversations that we had on this channel with the photographers, no matter whether it's in like advertising photography or whether it's whatever it may be. It's to have it's this creation of the body of work that becomes really important to define you as a photographer, in the long term sort of thing. I tell you what, my original intention with this was actually I'm sure you're familiar with Philip Weinmann's work. He's an Austrian photographer, does street photography. It's very high contrast, super high contrast, with a lot of white negative space and a very extremely high contrast. And that was my first instinct, was to go that far with it. But I'm also a sucker for clouds. It's just this thing. I just love clouds.
But you could have separated, or you could have a diptych. Nothing wrong with a diptych.
Yay, that's very true.
When you have two photos, so you could have just a cloud shot with some of the elements, and then you could just blow out and have the two of them tell your story. Like you're interested in the abstraction and you're interested in the cloud, but together that's a very different story that you're telling. Yeah. So you can add it. One photo doesn't have to tell everything.
That's a really great idea, because then you have the missing element.
Yeah,
that's a great idea.
It's a very cool idea.
Yeah.
So you don't have to superimpose. You could have also done an airplane shot and the sky and the building shot, and leave the two of them next to each other. Because then it's like, oh, is there an airport nearby? Oh, is this an area where planes fly by all the time? So you can again tell a different story, in a more conceptual way, instead of telling the people, oh yeah, there is something that should be there. But I think what's important for my photography often is that I like to leave the viewer with room for them to explore the picture.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that makes sense, but I want them to look at or my diptychs or my photographs to kind of tell their own story within this, within leave them room to go somewhere else.
Excellent.
Because you now told them the story. You told them, oh, there should be a plane, but without the plane and a plane on the next page even. Let's say you do a little zine on buildings and skies. The plane can be there. It could be a little piece in a sky, but maybe not put into it doesn't all have to be at once.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll remember the name of this road that we were on.
Shad Thames.
There we go, Shad Thames. So we went down there, and it was kind of deserted most of the time, apart from the odd person walking by and some delivery drivers and things like that happening. And you were just taking a photo of the street, and there's a high chance that actually it was the one you ended up using, but
most likely
within a few frames or something like that. And I saw this this girl walking towards us, and she was, with her headphones on and whatnot, and just about to put her mask back on. And I thought, that's framed really nicely through your arm while you were taking a photo. And that's what drove me to take that pic right there. There's still a few people in the background too. But it kind of summed up sort of our days to a certain extent. Someone walking along, listening to their music, heading off to work, heading back from work, whatever it might be, still having to put their mask on and whatnot. It's felt right to me.
This is another one of these locations in London. It's actually Chetham's is a little side street that's just off of Tower Bridge. And it's unique in the sense that it has these iron bridges going across the street. So what it actually is you've got warehouses right on the River Thames. And in the olden days, they used to unload barrels, I think, and store them in these, from the ships into the warehouse. And then they used to roll the barrels across these bridges into the next building on the other side of the road. And that's why these bridges are at a slight incline. Of course, nowadays they're all apartments and, and stuff like that. But it's still one of these old streets with it's a cobbled road. And typically, of course, because it's literally right next to Tower Bridge, usually this is packed with tourists. This is the most touristy area in central London, I would say. And to see it as empty as that, I don't think we'll ever.
It'll never happen again.
See it like
not
that
once.
again. It's
not even in the middle of the night.
Yeah, there's another photo that we're going to talk about in a minute where you can see more of the actual street. But yeah, it's a very cool location.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Also, Instagram loves this location, by the way.
For some reason. Sure it does.
Yeah.
So my first feedback, I love that you took a risk of creating this frame to frame your view, which I think is great. I think it would be helpful. I actually want to see that it's a person a little more.
Yeah.
So I almost don't need it as dark. Usually, I'm all for super contrasty, but for some reason, I just see the ear, I think.
Yeah, this is one of those, even if you, exactly as it is, if it was cropped in to the more of that center portion to make that person bigger.
Right. I don't mind that it's blurry. I think it's a little blurry, because you're so close, probably.
Yeah.
The person, which I think kind of gives that feeling of somebody standing there and you kind of just taking and seeing it and taking that shot. So I think that would actually, to me, I think I would like to see a little bit more of the person, or you can just bring out the grays more.
Yeah.
So I can identify it as a person, the ear. And then I like that triangle that it creates, that shape. Now, ideally, the person that you focused on would have been one step earlier or two.
Yeah, totally.
In that peak moment.
It was one of those, either take it as it was or miss it entirely.
Yeah.
So in an ideal world, you would have taken it, 2 steps earlier. So you would have had the whole person in it, because again, you're setting up this frame. Or you could have waited for another person to come by. Well, I guess you could have said, hey, just stay like this for a second, and then wait for another person to walk where you needed it, maybe even under that bridge, because then your eye is actually going very deep into the photo and it comes back out. So there's a lot of interest between, what am I seeing in the back there? And then the person that you're shooting through. But I think it's, in terms of composition, I think it's very nice. And I also think it probably would help if you even lighten up around that person a little bit, because there's so much going on. So in the kind of street photography where it's about the scale and about one person moving through that space, it's helpful when you really immediately identify that person as a shape.
Right.
So your eye doesn't want to look for that person. I mean, I know that person is there, and I know that's who you're focusing on. But if the rest of the bridge is a little bit lighter, just lighten it up a little bit, the person will pop more.
Yeah. Completely
I
agree.
mean, I could have also seen when you go back and let's see, the light goes just on the flag. I think it's like a little, or the flag or whatever that is. For some reason, my eye goes to that part. Oh, it's like an Adidas store, like those stripes. But somehow there's enough going on that even if you reframe it without a special person in it, I think it holds enough interest for the person to go back and forth into that picture frame.
I couldn't agree more. And again, I haven't looked at this since I first did it, you know, and everything you've just described is kind of things that were going through my mind when I've kind of picked up these photos before today. I thought, I wish that was like that, like that, like that, like that. And you've picked up on every single one of those, every single one. I couldn't agree more with you. So,
I mean, it could have also been like if you. Sorry, yeah.
That being said, I'd like to have got Kay to stand still taking that photo for longer. But if you've ever tried to get Kay to sit still for more than 5 seconds, you'd realise that's an impossibility.
Yeah, that's true.
Always.
You know what?
Also, of course, you know, you're basically shooting like you're behind me at this point, and I don't think I was even aware that you were.
No, you weren't
taking that shot. So yeah.
But sometimes it's even enough. If he would have just stood there, you could have just taken the silhouette of his head and the ear on one side of it, or even just a sliver of that on one kind of fragment on the left side, and then create with the rest, because the geometry of the bridge and the people is very dynamic. So there's a whole other picture that is possible to kind of create.
Absolutely.
So you didn't even need that arm. I think the arm is nice to have to create this triangle, but it also limits you that, again, you're creating a window and you want people to see into this window. So whatever you're showing needs to count.
I know about 30 different things that I would want to do slightly differently had we been back there today, for sure.
I think you need to go back.
Oh, we will.
They'll be interested. Like that again is, but this goes to the point. It's really great to go back to places.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking of a project where it's in Germany, actually, my mother's house where she grew up in. And I just took kind of quick snapshots while I was there. And when I looked at them at home, I'm like, how did I miss this? There was like this imprint of time of a shutter, and I didn't see that, but I saw it in the photo at home. And I know the next time, this is what I'm going to focus on. So it's really helpful sometimes to just kind of take these survey shots and look at them at home, and it's like, oh yeah, that pattern is wonderful, and there's this wonderful contrast, and how could I see the black and light better, and how can I add a silhouette, how can I have a person move through it?
So this photo would have been taken in exactly the same location that I was standing when you took the photo of my arm, essentially. So again, this is a location called Shad Thames, is right next to Tower Bridge. One of the things about London, I think that makes London really quite unique and really quite pretty in my view, is that you still have a lot of this old history around there. Of course, nowadays these are all, I guess, luxury apartments, you know. And it was funny to see how these iron bridges are now being used as balconies, but of course they're on an incline. So that must be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine like having your breakfast and it's like you drop something and it just rolls off?
There goes that boiled egg.
Yeah. Bye. So, but it's a really nice location. It's one of the few locations or streets in London that still has a cobbled road surface.
The cobblestone, yeah.
Yeah. So, that's really quite pretty.
You do a great job in setting the shot up, and I think, again, it's very cinematic, which is very much like your first shot, where, you can just kind of see somebody running through it. I mean, it's very, I mean, it almost looks like a movie set. It looks so unreal.
Yeah.
I think I love that there is a person that's kind of hovering, walking on the side. I mean, I think if I would be nitpicky, I might have waited 2 more steps to have this person kind of fit into that left space more in the lower 2/3 on the right side, like maybe 1 more step. But then I don't know if I tend to do continuous shooting because I don't sometimes know where I want my person to be. And sometimes it makes compositionally more sense when I look at them visually. So I'm saying that, but I think, it might be the perfect place. The one thing I would most definitely take out is that white line. And I said I would be nitpicky. I would just take it out because that's where my eye goes. And I do not want my eye to kind of go on that. I don't even know what that white line is on his head.
I think it's probably part of the building right next to his head. I think you're right.
Or just even darken it.
Yeah.
Because my eye that's not where I want to be at all.
Yeah.
And I keep going there. And I think once that's gone, it's a beautiful composition. I think the tones are great. I think the scene is great. And I think it works really well. You could have made this a silhouette shot.
Yeah.
If there would have been a person walking in front of that lit building, in that lighter building, all the way at the end of that tunnel. So that would have been, when you see like the Phil Wyman, when there's a little person, if there would have been a person walking towards you or out of that, or this person, it would have had that silhouette person feeling.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's one of these shots, I think, where, you wish there would have been something happening in the center, like, some kind of somebody with a bright red umbrella or something. That would have been like perfect.
But the shot almost, the person is not, it's not about the person. The person is only there to give your sense of scale and that there are people. Your shot is beautifully set up. It doesn't need, I think, the extraordinary happening. I mean, if it does, wow, that's great. If kids, come with a soccer ball, shooting a ball and the light hits it, wow.
Great, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, wow, wonderful. But then you would probably have to go back and see if at some point the light hits these streets, and if there's a sliver of light with somebody walking through it, then it becomes a very different shot. So this is when, when I look for where I should shoot, I will look for a sliver of light. And then you have a couple of minutes. Let's see somebody walking through. Is there a kid coming? Something that adds it. But I don't think your shot is that kind of shot. And I don't think it needs it. I think it's just kind of a beautiful, more architectural shot with a person for scale, with a sense of mystery. And
yeah, it's definitely a really unique, I mean, even for London, it's a really unique location.
It is, isn't it?
And it's not a particularly long street either. It's just a small little side street, I
mean, I would definitely go back, and if I don't know what the light does when it's like a bright day, what happens? Yeah. If there is like a little sliver coming through somewhere or from above, and what happens, the shadows of these bridges hit the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it's a high noon.
Yeah, fully agree.
At noon, it'll be amazing because you will have on the street, you will have this rhythm of the bridges. And then you have people walking through. It's a very different shot.
There'll be a lot of opportunity for that. Now things are opening up, because this you'll never ever ever be able to get this shot again.
No,
not once, not ever. It cannot be that empty.
Maybe at night time.
Even then that road is.
What amazes me about this particular location is the fact that because it's right next to Tower Bridge. I mean, obviously Tower Bridge is probably one of the most photographed, landmarks of London generally. But I think most people miss this little side street.
It's beautiful. It's such a. It looks like a movie set.
Exactly. It's unreal. I mean, when you're there, it's a mix of like, Harry Potter and like Victorian London sort of a thing. It's a very cool place.
Now, what's the series, the British series with the...
You're not thinking of Peaky Blinders, are you?
Yes, thank you. Peaky Blinders.
Yeah.
Thank you. But it's that kind of feeling of the brick wall and the dark and the steam. I mean, when you look at that, how they filmed it, I mean, it's the same set in every episode, or I only watched the first couple ones, but the dark in the suit. And I don't know, I mean, he looks like he's wearing a suit, which is always great. Like, I love people in suits and, where there's like a tie flying or something.
Yeah.
So this final one from me was near the first one. It was a similar area, but just up the road, I believe. And so that building in the background is the Shard, by the way. Which is that still the tallest building in Europe?
In Europe, I'm not sure. Maybe
I think it was when it was built. Maybe it's not anymore. It's certainly the tallest building in the UK. I think still now. And again, Kay was taking his shots, and it just saw an opportunity to capture Kay doing what he does best, right? And he was just sat down in this great little position with his leg out, and it just struck me as that's how I think of Kay when I normally, leg nice and spread. Yes.
Okay.
And then just capturing it, again, that sense of scale with those buildings in the background. Yeah. Good location too. I like it.
Great. I think it's you guys. What you do really well is the details and the architectural shapes in London. And I also so for example, I love the fact that this tree with no leaves, it kind of aligns with the building, maybe. But I like the added tree in the landscape. I also like that the knees mimic the building.
Right. Yeah.
There's this repetition of shape, which is also something that is nice to look for and to capture.
I actually took three shots at this moment, and you were in a slightly different position for each one, and I chose this particular one for exactly that reason.
Yeah, because it's great to have the repetition of the shape and mimic the shard, and then again, I mean, the leading line. I mean, I'm not even sure that because you stop the viewer's eye with the person.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the person goes right there and then you move around and look at the building. And I think it's the same suggestion. If you wanted to make it more about scale, I think this is more about Kay shooting, in this area. And I think these are all amazing shots to put in your website to kind of showing you as a photographer. If you wanted to see scale, I would move him way back.
Further back. Yep.
Because he's still too big.
Yeah.
In terms of really pushing the scale, the scale part of the photograph. But again, I mean, the tones are great, the location is great, the light is great. Not so much street photography, but yeah.
It's an interesting location in the sense that this whole area has changed a lot over the last decade, I would say. Because I remember when I used to live in London, the British Shard wasn't built.
Right.
At that point, that whole area was very, very different back then. It wasn't in any way as modern, futuristic looking as it is today. It was like relatively old buildings, and that side of the river was a little bit dilapidated.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
No, but I do remember going to the Shard, and it's kind of a strange bottom plaza.
Yeah.
That feels very desolate. But I actually think that's a kind of probably a good street photography place to do the kind of silhouette shots that also are about scale. Because you have these big buildings, you have a staircase and people will walk through it. So there's a great opportunity to practice that kind of architecture. If you kind of set back and use the stairs, and I mean, for some reason, I remember the strange plaza there that felt very awkward and very uncomfortable as an urban planning space. Maybe it's changed a lot. I mean, maybe 5 years ago, but it was odd. Bless you.
COVID. What can I say?
But I mean, you know, both of you do the architectural setup really well. Now you just have to be kind of brave and let life happen in that space, and kind of include that if that's what you're interested in.
I think we naturally gravitate to that type of shot, right? And like you say, we kind of not necessarily get sidetracked by doing shots like that, but it's just where our eye kind of goes, and it's what we automatically see.
Well, I think, I mean, this is what I mentioned, you know, early on, where I think the sort of takeaway from me in this was that, you know, I have a strong tendency to look at a set as a whole, because I love setting up sets, and I love environmental portraits, and I love environments, and I love fiddling around with, we've talked about this many times, with you know, with sets. And so I look at a scene and I take in the sets. So for me, it's all about almost like letting that part go, and then looking at the life that happens in that particular scene.
Yeah.
You know, so so that was definitely the sort of the takeaway. Because when we got back home and I had a look at the shots from that day, I kind of thought, okay, I need to focus in more on the human aspect of it, you know, and the human interaction and the action itself.
So I just, while you're talking, so I kind of just, because I'm interested in the person, and I don't know if you guys can even see it.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of pushed to the side, cropped, where I'm interested in the shape of the leg. I'm interested in the shape of the arm. As a background, the buildings are perfect, but it becomes a very different photograph.
Yeah, that's right.
I feel like all of a sudden, because it's not centered, it's kind of pushed to the side.
Yeah.
It becomes much more about the person, and it becomes about the shapes more.
That's very interesting.
You know, so I would probably include the arms, but I almost don't need all of that on the side. Like I like the arm. It's like these moments where somebody's just sitting there taking a photo, but he's not the main actor, but he's necessary in order to keep the tension of it.
Yeah.
It's just a very different way of kind of looking at this.
Yeah, that's cool. I like
because
that
now it's like, oh, what is he looking at? He's looking at me, but I'm looking at the building. All of a sudden, this leading line in the middle that leads you to the triangle, but that's not where you want me to be. I don't know. So I tend to include fragments, but you almost don't even need it. You could just have just like the shape. And then it's like, what is that? A sculpture? Is that a person? Is it...
Yeah, you don't actually have to give it away.
Yeah.
No, like...
Just Kay's sexy leg.
Keep a little secret.
I just have my leg in there.
Keep a little mystery, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
What would have made that then is if you were just lifting your jeans up ever so slightly, showing off your ankles.
That's a different photography.
Yeah. In next week's episode,
but you know what?
join us again as we...
But again, so then I would go in and lighten where these people are, so that the silhouette becomes a much more about the shape.
Yeah.
And I don't want to see these people. Like they can go away from me. So it would even make it lighter, because then the person becomes more noticeable.
You know what's really interesting?
Yeah.
As you zoom in, on top of that little wall on the side here, on the left-hand side, there's this statue thing sitting on the top. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, what is that?
I'm not entirely sure what that is.
Because I thought, like, is that a person?
Right.
Was
So
it
because,
sculpture?
right. But all of a sudden your photo is no longer about the architecture. You could bring out that little statue and have it like, oh, so I'm looking at that person that's jumping. What is that? Off the rooftop. Why? And then it's no longer about the architecture.
It's interesting, isn't it? You know, I couldn't agree more, you know? I mean, the original sort of crop, if you like, is what it is, right? But you gain a different perspective, a different level of interest when you go through framing it in the way that you've, you know, in the ways that you've just described, Nina. Definitely.
Do you sometimes experiment with different crops of the same shot and then sort of let it linger a little bit and then make a decision after a while? Or?
I try to frame it or see it that way when I'm out, but I think you gain that view, and I think that's where my personal vision comes in. I see things in these weird crops. Or like, and that's not true. I mean, you learn over time to include fragments that initially I would think is kind of weird in my composition. And they add interest to it, that you can create these photos where there's fragments all on the outside. And that's a very interesting photo. It's a very different photo. It's not about the architecture. So your intent, just like with your daughter, what is it you want to show? If you want to show the architecture, and if you want to be an architecture photographer and just document what today looks like in the buildings, and maybe it's take the same shot of the same building every week for the next 52 weeks. The light will change, the trees will change, the leaves will change, the snow will change. And then you have this series of a change over time. So you're documenting this building over time. That's one way of doing it. I mean, there's 100 different ways of experiencing this. I mean, one shot is hard. Unless you have all of your shots are architectural drawings, then, architectural photographs. So then you're documenting the architecture. Then is your approach being very conceptual, and you just want the lines, then you zoom in and then you edit it. I mean, there's so many ways to go with your work. I mean, in the end, as an artist, you have to figure out where you want to be.
Okay, so the final image is what I would call the only true silhouette that I managed to capture on that trip, where we were meant to only shoot silhouettes. But so this was just outside of St. Paul's. At one time, the tallest building in London, believe it or not.
Is that true?
Yeah, wasn't it that, as far as I remember, wasn't it that no building in London could be taller than St. Paul's, so that St. Paul's could always be seen towering off the rest, which is why London, as a metropolitan city, has, until fairly recently, has never had any skyscrapers.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So, and I believe Canary Wharf. In fact, when I first moved to London back in 1996 or something, Canary Wharf was the only skyscraper in the whole of London at the time. So, because that's the one thing that surprised me, actually. I remember when I flew in for the first time, I was really surprised as to how spread out London was and how not tall it was at all. In comparison to cities like New York or even Chicago or places like that, it was just remarkable as to how flat London was. That's starting to change. There's a whole bunch of interesting buildings that have gone up over the last few years. So, but yeah, so that was that shot was taken just outside of St. Paul's, and it's actually this is a little alley going into a shopping mall.
One New Change shopping center. Yeah.
One New Change. That's what it's called. Yeah. So that's.
Have you sent the right one? Because this one doesn't have any birds or planes in.
Oh, well. It's probably also the only photo that's not a composite. In fact, I can't remember whether you were really in that photo.
But you know what? You didn't need it, because your leading line goes to the person, and behind the person you have a building. So you didn't feel like there needed to be an additional point of interest, which you don't.
Yeah, and I also like the smoothness of the clouds there, because you have a little bit of contrast and a little bit of detail, but it's not too crazy. So,
and I love that I love the reflection of the building on the glass side. So there's enough interest going on. I mean, I think, it's great, and I think my only suggestion, but I like a lot of contrast. I would push the building a little lighter, so then the person pops a little more.
Yeah.
Which I'd like to do, just because if it's about a silhouette, make it a silhouette.
Yeah.
Not make it a building. Is it a silhouette? I mean, make the decision and go for it. Be bold.
Yeah, I do agree. I think he does blend in a little too much,
And otherwise, I mean, it's a great shot. Now you need to go back and you'll reshoot, and I can't wait if it will be any different.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this goes well with like the building, I mean, it could be a whole series of, you have like these, I mean, actually now I see a whole new series, because this is oddly, I think that way. The first one with the balconies with the sky, then there's a person in the sky, then maybe there's only a sky with little pieces. So it could be this whole, where it's always 3 parts, in the middle just becomes something different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it turned out to be quite an interesting day for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's it was interesting to shoot. I don't normally use the camera that I use for that, because I think, as far as I remember, I used the 24-70 zoom lens, which I don't normally take around with me. That's usually a camera I use in a studio a lot, or for events. And I think the only reason I decided to use that particular Nikon on that day was because we had originally planned to also do a lot of filming. So the idea was,
right,
I can get away with one camera doing both. But I definitely, I think, the next time we go into town, I'm just going to limit myself to my little Fuji.
Yeah.
But also for this shot, I'm thinking, the next time, if you're standing there, what would happen if you're really close to the face and that kind of gets superimposed? It almost will get the size of the dome.
Yeah.
So you can do a lot of playing with scale. Like, you're playing it safe in most of your shots right now.
Yeah.
Like, you have kind of the same distance. It's very comfortable. You're very comfortable in this. In all of
we're trying to get them in focus.
I'm sure that's not so hard. But you're very safe. I think you can push it a lot more in terms of going closer to like, you could have gone so close and see what happens with the background, and how this black shape on the bottom repeats the shape of the dome.
That's a really good.
It's so much easier said than done, while me sitting here. And
but this is really good advice, because you're absolutely right. I think it's, when you're not totally familiar with a particular subject, you have a tendency, I think, naturally to play it safe.
You fall back on what you know.
Yeah,
right?
And then sometimes it takes somebody to say to you, look, you can kind of push the envelope a little bit on this, and then the next time you do this, you sort of those words ring in the back of your mind, and actually it just pushes you to try out things that are a little bit more risque as such.
So I'd love us to go to London, go to a couple of the locations that we went to before, and just try something different.
Well, see, the thing is also, you got to think like this shot, and very much the shot at the Shard, and also the shot at Shad Thames. Those are almost like Instagram typical shots. You see a lot of similar setups, especially this one at St. Paul's. And in many ways, it was a little bit like, oh, I wonder if I can recreate, those like famous shots almost. But what would be cool would be to go to London and to specifically say, right, we're specifically not gonna shoot, the popular angles, as it were.
Absolutely.
But we're just gonna focus on actually doing like the polar opposite of that.
Yeah.
Like, look at for example, if you're interested in the clouds, I am looking at the clouds in the building. And then, shooting up, shooting down, or fragments coming in. I mean, there's so many different ways. I'm sure if I would be standing there with you, I would be looking at very different parts of it just because what my eye is attracted to.
Absolutely.
You know what's good news? Is that we've got fantastic weather starting from tomorrow.
Really?
Yep. The rest of the month.
Was it
I think
actually
he's ready to go. He's ready to go.
I'm absolutely. Well, this is why it's so good to talk to you. Is that you've given us such good advice. It just makes you excited and want to get out there and try it out. You know,
the one thing that I've always liked when it comes to listening to a judge critiquing a photo competition, for example, was not necessarily, well, seeing that I rarely ever enter my own images into it, but it's really very educational just to listen to somebody talk about somebody else's photo, because you can learn just as much from that. And, you know, to all of our listeners and viewers out there who have been, you know, clinging on for 2 hours to to get to this point in the episode, you know, hopefully you've learned something. And hopefully you've had some takeaways that will help you improve your photography, you know, through this. That'd be extremely helpful. And that being said, it would be amazing for us to see what street photography you've come up with. So if you have any street photography, anything that you would like us to see, you know, make sure you send that in to us. You can email it to camerashakepodcast@gmail.com, or you can just hit us up on Instagram or Facebook, or send us a snail mail or whatever.
Or you could send it to me as well.
Yes. And you can send it to
you can send it to me.
If you dare. Hear my opinion. If you still want to hear my opinion.
So it'd be super awesome to see some of your images. So again, you know, send it in. That'd be super wicked.
I feel a new section of the show coming up. Nina critiques.
There you go. Ta-da. So with that, we have come to the end of this week's episode. That was Camera Shake Podcast episode 65. Nina, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show again. Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you.
This was probably one of the most educational episodes for us.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Absolutely. I was like, we learned something, you know, in every episode.
Yeah.
But this
was inspiring.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, no doubt we'll have you back next time once we've created some more photography. And of course, the offer still stands. You know, next time you're in London, we'll be out photographing the streets.
I think I have to fly through London the next time and just stop. And we need to go to all these spots and see how we all approach it.
That would be absolutely wonderful. Cool. Right. Now we have truly come to the end of episode 65. We shall see you again next Thursday.